Hey, what's up guys? So as you know, version 2.0 just came out. We got Inazuma and Ayaka, who's a brand new Cryo sword user, who I'm going to be covering in this guide. I'll be giving you everything you need to know about this character, her playstyle, team comps, builds, and just general information so that you can play her optimally. If you don't know, Ayaka is a pretty powerful sword user who can infuse her own attacks with Cryo, has a pretty good charge attack, but especially an amazing burst that does an absolutely insane amount of damage, which makes her very versatile because you can run her just for her burst or for her whole kit, making her viable as a DPS and as a support, and very powerful in quick swap teams that swap through all their characters using their abilities, synergizing all their bursts together. And so I'm really excited to get into more detail about Ayaka. Personally, I really like her and believe she's powerful, but as with most characters, you should only pull for them if you like them and if you enjoy their playstyle, which I will be showcasing in this video. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and also shout out to Zajef77 for helping me test her and her optimal builds. With that being said, let's get into it. So first of all, I feel like the question on a lot of people's minds is how you're going to play this character, what her playstyle is, and in what team comps she shines, how to make her good / how to play her optimally. So that's what we're going to start with. In order for me to explain that efficiently though, let's look at her talents. First of all, you'll notice that a lot of her kit is centered around buffing her charge attack. Like a lot of her passive talents, like her special sprint, which is sort of like a Mona dash, but it infuses your own attacks with Cryo. As you can see, it infuses your attacks with Cryo for a brief period, and it also applies Cryo on nearby opponents. The infusion actually lasts for 5 seconds, and what's nice about the Cryo application on nearby opponents is that one of your passive talents, if you manage to hit Cryo on someone at the end, will give you 18% cryo damage bonus and restore some of your stamina. On top of that, another one of your passive talents will also buff your charge attacks by giving you a 30% increased damage to your normal and charge attacks for 6 seconds after you use your elemental skill. That means that once you press E, you are going to be buffed for your attacks for a little bit. Now, regarding your actual abilities, the first thing I want to show you guys is her charge attack and how it works. So it does hit 3 times, as you can see, and it is pretty strong, but the main thing about it, the main upside that I really like, and if I can show it off here, is that it does have a very long range. So as you can see, it managed to hit those enemies even from here. I'll try to show it off maybe like from here. Wait, that missed barely. Yeah, there you go. So it does have a very long range. On top of that, not only your charge attack, but basically your whole kit can hit inside of Venti Burst, which can be very nice for synergizing with him, and we'll talk about this more in the party comp section. But basically, as you can see, the charge attack here will hit inside the burst, and Ayaka's burst paired with Venti also works very well. Just to show you, it does work very well with Venti burst because you throw it, and then it like gets mixed in there and just kills everything. So that sort of intro, let's talk about actually her burst and her skill. First of all, her skill, very straightforward ability, 10-second cooldown, pretty good scaling. You press it, you deal AoE crowd damage. There's not too much to know about this ability. The only thing to keep in mind is that after you use this ability, you do buff your attacks with this talent. And it also does generate a lot of particles, giving you either 4 or 5 particles every cast, once every 10 seconds. Lastly, we do have to talk about her burst, which in my opinion is her biggest strength. This is a really powerful ability, and it is why I enjoy playing Ayaka. I usually tend to build her around her burst because it has a massive scaling given the amount of times it hits. In fact, what's pretty crazy about Ayaka's burst is that it can hit up to 20 times and then explode and do a bigger hit. Now, while sometimes it can be unrealistic to hit 20 and you might want to assume it hits like 15 or whatever, that's still a massive scaling because it does 157% at only talent level 6 on every single cut, and on top of that, the bloom will explode at the end, dealing another instance of damage. It also applies Cryo very fast, lasts for 5 seconds, and it's basically this projectile that you shoot in front of you, this sort of whirlwind of ice, dealing massive amounts of AoE damage to everything around it, and it basically like moves forward continuously, but it stops once it hits an enemy. What I mean by that is, let's say I just shoot my Q here, it's gonna move forward, hit that mage, and then stop right there and keep hitting her. It won't like run past her, making it very good at sort of reliably hitting an opponent. It can be annoying against enemies like Geo Vishaps that can get knocked away, and so you can miss more hits depending on what you're fighting, but generally speaking, you will get a decent amount of cuts off, making this burst absolutely devastating. Something to keep in mind is that the energy cost is high, it's 80, but you can play around this in one of 2 ways. Either you can stack energy recharge on her, or a more optimal way is by running a cryo battery like Diona, who can generate a lot of cryo particles for you with her shield, and you can run a weapon like a Sacrificial or a Favonius Bow on her, but we'll talk about this in the party comp section. So basically, it shouldn't be too hard to get your burst back on cooldown because it is a pretty long cooldown, and you can play around this high energy cost. Also, something to note is that your burst does snapshot, which means it factors in any buff you give your Ayaka for the whole duration of the burst, making the burst a lot better when paired with any character who can buff you, like a Bennett. And also, while her burst does do AoE damage, it's mainly when you pair it with something like Venti that it can really hit a bunch of enemies at once, whereas generally it's really strong single target, but won't be as good against multiple enemies as like a Ganyu burst, because it will obviously stick to that one target that it hits initially, although it will keep moving if it does kill that first enemy. And so overall, Ayaka is very versatile, and her burst is so powerful that it's basically great at any team you fit her in. She has many playstyles, which we'll cover in the team comp section, but for now you should know that her burst is her main source of damage, and while her charge attacks are good and her skill is also good, and they are all important to use efficiently, her burst is, as I mentioned, the main thing to focus on. What that means is that in most teams, while you are going to be charge attacking, you're not going to be spamming it all the time. You're going to be swapping between characters, using all your bursts and stuff, and then during the downtime is when you use this charge attack. But obviously some team comps will charge attack more than others, especially in sort of quote-unquote traditional main DPS teams where Ayaka is going to be your on-field auto attacker. And so for your talent priority, for all those reasons, your burst should be what you level first, and then after that it's usually your normal attacks, which will level your normal and charge attacks, and then your skill after that. Do keep in mind though that in some teams, running her as a pure support, you might want to level your skill before your normals, but generally speaking, it is burst first and then normals and skill. Also, I wanted to showcase that to get your burst back easier, something you can do is, I'll wait for these guys to jump on me, but you can press E, and then while the particles are traveling to you, you press your Q, and as you can see, you now already have some particles built up, which is nice to start. And if you actually want to take this a step further, you can get even more particles by doing something like Diona E, Ayaka E, and then Q while all the particles are traveling to you. And as you can see, I got even more particles from that. Also, in case you're wondering how our dash feels, it's kind of like a Mona dash, which did get buffed this patch, so it's pretty nice. And regarding the cryo application, as you can see, they're not getting hit by it. It's only when you pop out that it'll do that cryo application, and then you'll get your buffs. And you guys should know that if you are charge attack spamming, so as a main DPS, the delay is quite long, so you do usually want to animation cancel it by either jumping or dashing. And what's nice about dash canceling is that you can actually refund your stamina if you hit an opponent, and it also re-imbues your sword with cryo. So you can do that charge attack into like a dash cancel, or even do it into a jump cancel. Now we're going to talk about Ayaka's builds, starting with her artifacts. This can depend highly on your playstyle, so I'll try to include as much information as possible so you know what build is good for you. First of all, if you're running any type of freeze comp, so if you're running Ayaka with Mona or Sing Chu, if you're just perma-freezing enemies, Blizzard Strayer is basically always the way to go, because not only does it give you 15% cryo damage bonus, it also gives you 40% crit rate, which is absolutely massive and the best set effect if you can use it. And if you are running main DPS Ayaka, where you're spamming your charge attacks, I can't recommend a set that isn't Blizzard Strayer because of how much better this is, especially considering the fact that all your attacks will be cryo. Now, if you're running a quick swap team, maybe a reverse melt, or anything that isn't perma-freezing enemies, since you can't really be utilizing the 4-piece set of the Blizzard Strayer, you can either run the 2-piece Blizzard Strayer with 2-piece Noblesse Oblige for that increased burst damage and the cryo damage that you gain here. I do also have to mention the new artifact set, the emblem set, which I haven't had time to farm for, so I just put it on screen. This set can also be good and potentially better depending on your rotation and playstyle. Like if you're just running her in a quick swap team where you're not really charge attacking much, this new set will give you more burst damage at certain ER thresholds, and even if the damage is equivalent or slightly less than 2 Blizzard Strayer to Noblesse, the 2B set giving you 20% energy recharge is not something you should forget, because that's the equivalent of 3 to 4 substats, which can make your life a lot easier for not only farming better artifacts, but also investing those stats into crit or attack percent. Something you should know if you run the emblem set is that it doesn't change how much energy recharge you want on Ayaka, and once you have enough to spam your burst on cooldown, any extra wouldn't be as good as attack percent or crit on your stats. And for more information on that, a more detailed look, you should refer to my previous video. But the new emblem set is good because 25% of your energy recharge is converted into burst damage, which can be great for a quick swap styled Ayaka, focusing on your burst damage. Overall though, I recommend running the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer if you're freezing, 2-piece Blizzard Strayer with 2-piece Noblesse, or 4-piece Emblem if you aren't running freeze comps. Now let's talk about the specific stats you want on every piece. First of all, I know a lot of people are going to have concerns about exactly how much energy recharge you want, and it's really hard because there's never an exact number. It depends on a lot of things. Usually though, I would recommend running her with a cryo battery like Diona, who, as I mentioned earlier, is very good because her elemental skill generates you some particles, and you can either use it twice with Sacrificial Bow for even more particles, or run a Favonius on her for this effect, which once again gives you more energy. So if you're running her with a Cryo battery, you can run somewhere from like 130 to a bit higher, maybe to 140 ER, but this highly depends on you, your playstyle, and your team comps. If you're running her without a Cryo battery, personally, I needed about 150 to get my burst on cooldown, and so having energy recharge on your substats is good, but usually you don't need it on a main stat. For that reason, I recommend an attack percent Sands, a cryo damage goblet, because all your damage is cryo, and a crit circlet, so either crit damage or crit rate. However, with the Blizzard Strayer set specifically, you do want a crit damage circlet because you already gain so much crit rate. Now let's talk about Ayaka's weapons. Ayaka does have quite a lot of good options for every type of player, so that's what we're going to get into right now. First of all, Blackcliff Longsword is usually her best 4-star option, so that's what I recommend for most players. It is a weapon that's accessible for everyone because it is in the Star Glitter shop, so even free-to-play players can get it. However, it obviously does cost Star Glitter, which can be a lot harder to get for free-to-play or lower spenders. That being said, it's usually her best in slot 4-star weapon because it gives you a very high base attack, crit damage on the stat, which is great, especially with the Blizzard Strayer set that gives you crit rate, and the passive also increases your attack by 12% on every stack up to 3 times when you defeat an opponent, so it's just a good weapon overall. If you don't have Blackcliff Longsword though, there are many other good options. The Flute can be a good, gotcha 4-star option because it gives you just a lot of attack, and the effect is actually pretty decent when paired with the Blizzard Strayer set because this does buff, it gives you a lot of crit rate, which actually does apply for some reason to the passive of the Flute. There's also the Black Sword, which is usually a better option. However, it is more of a niche weapon in my opinion because it's only really good when you can use the crit rate stat and the effect, which increases your normal and charge attacks by 20%. So if you are spamming your attacks in a main DPS build, Black Sword can be very good. However, do keep in mind that while the crit rate stat is usually very good, with Ayaka specifically, she is oftentimes going to be running the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer as a main DPS, which already gives you 40% crit rate. And then on top of that, if you're running Cryo Resonance, that'll give you more crit rate. And if you have any crit rate on your substats, you might actually go overboard to where having the crit on Black Sword might be overkill and not needed. Lastly, the best free-to-play option if you don't have Blackcliff Longsword is the new craftable sword. It is locked behind a quest, so it might take you a bit to get it, but it is the new craftable weapon that actually looks very good for Ayaka. It will be worse damage than like a Blackcliff Longsword, but it can out DPS the other 4-star options if you need the passive giving you that energy, because it gives you a lot of attack percent and the effect gives you a bunch of energy, basically up to 18 energy at refinement 1, and once again, since it is a free-to-play craftable weapon, you can refine this for free. I also wanted to quickly mention that the Harbinger of Dawn can be a good free-to-play option because at Refinement 5, it just gives you a ton of crit rate and crit damage on the stat, so it can be a decent alternative if you don't need the energy you get from the new Blacksmith weapon. Moving on to the 5-star weapons, they're pretty much all good, like Summit Shaper, Jade Cutter, and even Aquila, just because of the insane amount of stats, are good and usually better than the 4-star options. But her best weapon overall is the new sword designed specifically for her. The Mist Splitter weapon is just amazing. It gives you crit damage, high base attack, and a very powerful effect, especially for Ayaka, giving you just a ton of elemental damage bonus. The first part of the effect just gives you elemental damage percent, and then the second part, when you deal elemental damage with your normal attack, which Ayaka can, when you cast your elemental burst, and when your energy isn't 100%, so after you cast your burst, or when you're just charging your energy, you get extra elemental damage bonus, making this an amazing sword for Ayaka. Overall though, she has amazing options for every type of player, so you should be able to get a good weapon on her with no problem. So for Constellations, obviously I have none because I'm saving my gems for the like 500 characters they announced. But Ayaka is a special case because she has some good ones, but mainly later on. Like first of all, her Constellation 1, I wouldn't recommend pulling for. It basically decreases the cooldown of your elemental skill when you do normal or charge attack. So for a main DPS Ayaka, it allows you to spam your E more, which honestly isn't that big of a DPS upgrade. Her Constellation 2, however, is pretty good. It basically buffs your burst by making it unleash 2 smaller ones that deal 20% of your original one's damage. And since your burst already deals so much damage, 20% of that is actually not bad. So her Constellation 2 is actually pretty good. 3 and 5, as you know, increase the level of your talents. Her Constellation 4 is basically her best one. This one's actually pretty amazing because it decreases the defense of opponents that are hit by your burst by 30% for 6 seconds. And if you don't know, basically anything in Genshin that decreases your defense is just good. For example, Lisa's like main use in some teams is being able to actually decrease the defense of opponents, but that's only by 15%. Ayaka's C4 is actually a 30% decrease, which is pretty huge. for 6 seconds. And lastly, her Constellation 6 is like a weird buff. Basically, every 10 seconds, your charge attack damage will be increased by almost 300%, which allows you to use a charge attack for a burst, but the buff only lasts for one charge attack. It says the buff will be cleared 0.5 seconds after your charge attack hits an opponent. So basically, this will be used in these sort of quick swappy teams where you swap into her, use your skills. You'll just weave in a charge attack here for another instance of burst damage, which can increase your burst by a bit. However, I don't recommend pulling for her C6 because it's not that big of an upgrade. And Ayaka is obviously a great unit even at C0, so I don't believe you need Constellations, but 4, 2, and 6 are her main ones. Now we're going to get into arguably the most important section of this video, Ayaka's team comps. Now, as I mentioned multiple times throughout this guide, there are many different ways to play her, so I will be trying to cover everything in as much detail as I can. First of all, let's talk about Ayaka's freeze comps. These teams are amazing for Ayaka because it allows her to run the Blizzard Sphere set and maximize her damage because of how fast she can apply Cryo. She's very good in these teams as both a main DPS because her charge attack can be infused with Cryo, have a 100% Cryo uptime, and perma-freeze enemies when paired with a Hydra support like Xingqiu. But it can also be good in quick swap style teams, which we'll talk about in a little, where you can combo your burst and your skill with many other characters, like Mona and Venti for example, perma-freezing enemies and dealing a lot of damage. And so in a more traditional main DPS style team, when you are spamming your normals and charge attacks on your Ayaka, pairing her with a Hydra support like Xingqiu will constantly apply those rain swords to enemies, apply that Hydro, and then Ayaka will apply the Cryo, and you will effectively perma-freeze them off of your attacks. So your first core support in a freeze comp is obviously that Hydro support for the freeze. The third character you'd want in this team comp is another Cryo unit. You'd want another Cryo support for a battery, so you generate more Cryo particles to your Ayaka, allowing you to run less energy recharge. And so a lot of Cryo characters can work for this. A character like Kaya or Rosaria can provide a lot of damage and a good amount of particles. And alternatively, Diona can also be good because she generates a ton of particles as well, and she can act as a healer. Do keep in mind, however, that in a freeze comp, you can run a healer, but you don't need to because you're permanently freezing enemies. So for things like the Abyss, you should be able to just permanently freeze all the enemies, clear it without really taking much damage. Your last character is very flexible. An Anemo unit can be good to, first of all, run the Verdescent Vener set, reduce the resistance of opponents, and then on top of that you can get like elemental damage bonus with Kazuha. You can also run other Nemo characters like Sucrose or Jean to group up enemies, and Jean will also heal you. And Venti is probably one of the characters that has the most synergy with Ayaka. I showed it off earlier in the video, but basically your entire kit works in Venti's burst. Ayaka's charge attacks, her skill, and her burst can all hit enemies that are trapped inside of Venti's burst, making them very good together. Because of that, you can run them in like a DPS team, but you can also run them in a quick swap comp, like the one on screen right now, which is sort of Ganyu's best team, but instead of Ganyu, you're running Ayaka. And while Ganyu is the best DPS in the game, Ayaka can be a pretty good replacement because these units synergize very well with each other, spamming all their bursts together, Venti clumping them up, Mona dealing some damage and applying Hydro, and then Ayaka's burst, skill, and charge attacks can all deal massive amounts of damage inside of the burst. And in case you're wondering, Diona's in this team as well as a Cryo battery and also a healer if you need it. So there are many good sort of freeze comps you can run Ayaka on, and in all these teams you do want to make sure to run the 4-piece Blizzard Sphere for the 40% crit rate, and it's what I almost always recommend. If you are charge attacking, you might as well just freeze the opponents. So freeze comps overall are pretty good and they're very flexible. It's just Ayaka, a Cryo battery, and a Hydro character to freeze the enemies, and then your last slot is pretty flexible. Other than freeze teams, you can run her in very powerful reverse melt comps, like this one right here where you're running Venti to group up the enemies, Shangling's Pyronado to apply Pyro very fast, and Ayaka's burst to reverse melt on everything. It also works with Kazuha because he applies even more Pyro. So these are comps that are viable. However, do keep in mind you'll need more energy recharge on your Ayaka because there are no Cryo batteries in this team. Ayaka can also be good in reverse melt quick swap teams like this one, where you used to run Rosaria and Kaya with Bennett Shangling. Ayaka can take the place and actually be stronger than either Rosaria or Kaya and be able to reverse melt on Shangling's Pyro application. And then near the end of Ayaka's burst, her Cryo application might be too fast to reverse melt, but in that case, Shangling will be the one melting anyways, so it is a win-win. She can also be used as a replacement for Chongyun in the national team, where you're running Shangling, Bennett, Xingqiu, and then Phil. That last character can be in a Nemo unit like Sucrose, but it can oftentimes also be someone like Chongyun, and you can actually replace Chongyun with Ayaka because she does apply Cryo quite fast, and while your Shangling's Pyronado is rolling and your Xingqiu's rain swords are around you, you can be applying Cryo on Ayaka, allowing your Shangling to melt with her Pyronado. Lastly, since Ayaka's burst is so powerful, she can also be used in sort of random teams where you need a Cryo support, who's just there to apply Cryo and have a powerful burst. And so with that out of the way, we're going to do a DPS showcase now, where I'm going to be doing a full Abyss 12 clear, but also include some random footage from other bosses, just to show you Ayaka's full potential. That being said, my Ayaka does definitely have room for improvement. Since she was released so recently, she's only level 70 with 666 talents, but despite this, my damage is still very good. There just still is room for improvement. I'm currently running her on 2-piece Noblesse Oblige, 2-piece Blizzard Slayer because I don't have the emblem set, and I'm not running a freeze comp right now, or else I'd be on 4 Blizzard Slayer. And my weapon is a 4-star, the Blacklift Longsword, which does give me that crit damage, making my crit stats very good. And so this is what we are going to be showcasing, a C0 Ayaka with a 4-star weapon, 666 talent levels, but pretty good artifacts. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the showcase. And so overall, Ayaka is a fun and powerful unit who shines exceptionally well in freeze comps and who can also be good in reverse melt comps, which is my personal favorite way to play her. Her burst is a very powerful ability, and she also has cryo charge attacks, which can be amazing for permanently freezing enemies. And I also feel like it's my duty to remind you guys that you don't have to pull for her. She's not a must pull. She is pretty good, but you should only get her if you like her and do enjoy the team comps that she fits. This video is a bit longer than usual because there's a lot of information to cover and an insane amount of time and research went into it, so I do hope it was helpful. And so overall, with this video, you should now know how to build and play Ayaka optimally. As always, if there's anything new I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, so be sure to check that. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to thumbs up and sub if you're new because it does mean a lot. And with all that being said, I need to go back to exploring Inazuma, so I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.